Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PNU Talks. I am Calamlam, and my topic for today is augmenting the lesson playlist. A short introduction. I am currently a mathematics and research teacher in De La Salle Santiago Subel School, where I implement blended learning. I'm also an alumnus from Philippine Normal University, where I got my bachelor's and master's degree. But actually, I'm talking to you here now as an alumnus from the same school where I graduated in high school, elementary, and kinder. So more or less, I have a loyalty award in Philippine Normal University. Moving on, I also have some Edtech certifications. First, I am a Microsoft Certified Educator. I'm also a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert, and I am a Google Certified Educator. I hope my expertise in EdTech could help you this time. So, we have a term called lesson playlist. So, how can we explain lesson playlist? More or less, we just go back to the description of a normal music playlist in Spotify. So in a music playlist, songs are listed. In lesson playlist, instead of songs, lessons or learning activities are listed. So this is the normal setup of a lesson playlist. So normally, it will start with an introduction. An introduction will include instructions and objectives. Then it will be followed up by content or contents, where it can be a video, website, or write-up. Take note that the content is the main source of information for the lesson playlist. And then after the content, there will be assessment or assessments. The assessment is to check if the student really understood what is discussed in the content. So, earlier is the normal setup for a lesson playlist, but today we're going to discuss augmentations of lesson playlist. So we have the normal setup, the one that we discussed earlier. Then it will be followed by increasing difficulty, then adding integration, partial discovery, and full discovery. So of course, first we're going to discuss what we call the normal setup. Okay? For the normal setup, we're going to use my lesson playlist for circles. Okay. So this is my lesson playlist for circles, and this is already applicable for one unit. Now, in a lesson playlist, of course, you must first start with an introduction. So for the introduction, in this part, I just discuss here the topics that will be covered in this course because the instructions are included in the lessons themselves. So let's go back to the lesson playlist and let's open lesson 1. So the normal setup again will start with an introduction, then followed by a content. It can be either a video or a write-up, and then it will end with an assessment. So let's check first introduction. So for the introduction, you have the objectives for that specific lesson, and then it will be followed up by the instructions. After that, you're going straight to the content. So for the content, again, it can be a video, it can be a write-up, but I really suggest that we follow the principle of differentiation where we're going to present a topic using different mediums. So let's open this one. Okay, so since our topic is basics for circles, here is an example video where I got it from YouTube. So you have an option to make your own video, or you can just curate videos from the internet.
Hey y'all, here's the first video in Unit 2, Circles. and we're going to talk about some basics of circles today. And it's mostly going to be some vocabulary, but it's important that we get these things down before we move on in the unit.
Okay, so that is a video for basic of circles. Next, it will be followed by another content. And this time, it is not a video, instead it is a website. So this is for students or learners who are, let's say, more adept in learning through reading instead of watching videos. As you can see, this topic, or this website rather, has the same content with the video. And then after the content, we're going to continue with an activity. So this is the assessment part of a lesson playlist. So you will have questions, and these questions, well, students or learners will answer these questions by using the information gathered from the two contents that are presented earlier. So going back to lesson 1, so that is the normal setup for learning playlist. This time, we're going to discuss another augmentation of lesson playlist. We're going to continue with increasing difficulty. So, okay, we're already done with lesson playlist on circles that exemplifies a normal setup of a learning playlist. This time, we're going to take a look on another lesson playlist. So this time, we're going to use simple interest lesson playlist as an example for increasing difficulty. Okay, for increasing difficulty, actually its format is almost the same with the normal setup. So in this example, introduction until quiz 1 is similar with the normal setup. However, since this augmentation is increasing difficulty, then we added 3 more quizzes that will give more challenging problems to the students. So, as a discussion, let's start first with an introduction. Similar with the normal setup, our introduction will start with an objective, and then it will be followed by the instructions. As you can see here, the instructions are somewhat longer compared to the normal setup because it emphasizes here that you need to first watch the video and then work on the quizzes, and then it's stated here that the quizzes increases in difficulty. And quiz 4 is a quiz that summarizes all of the topics discussed in this lesson playlist. Okay, let's continue now to the next part of a lesson playlist, which is the content. So this time, the content is a video. So let's try to open one. Okay.
We're going to look at calculating simple interest today. And the formula for simple interest is...
So in increasing difficulty, our video will only contain basic concepts. So it is only applicable for answering basic questions. So in this example, where we have the introduction to simple interest. Going back to our lesson playlist, and then after that, we have another content. This time, we have a video on maturity value.
Good day, students. Welcome to math.serve.com. In this clip, we're going to be going over how to calculate the maturity value of a single payment loan.
Okay, so this is another video where it discusses the basics of maturity value. So more or less in this lesson playlist, the basic concepts are simple interest and maturity value. So after the two content, remember the content will only discuss basic concepts. It will not discuss more complicated concepts. So after the two video, you will proceed with quiz 1. So, excuse me. So quiz 1 will include content that could be answered by just replicating what the video shown. So again, quiz 1 or the first quiz, well, it will only include basic questions that could be answered through the contents stated in the two videos earlier. So once students are done with these activities, then the teacher will more or less ensure that the students know the basics of simple interest. After they learn the basics, then let's continue with quiz 2. Okay, so in quiz 2, this problem includes simple interest with partial payments. And more or less, this topic is not discussed in the two videos given earlier. So since it is not discussed, then we can say that this quiz is somewhat more difficult compared to what they learned in the content. So how can they answer this? This is the main essence of increasing difficulty. You're going to increase the difficulty of quizzes without giving another teacher prompting. Okay, so we're not going to give another video on how to solve this. Instead, we're just going to give tips on how to do this step by step. So the first quiz only includes problems that solves simple interest with only one payment. This is a problem that includes multiple payments. So in this quiz 1, so we have here the problem and then we have here the solution. In the solution, there is a table that can guide students to answer the problem, and then this table again includes tips on how to do it step by step. Okay? So more or less, if students know how to follow instructions or and have a schema on the concept of simple interest and maturity value, then they can answer this. However, this will be somewhat more difficult compared to what is discussed in the video and what is answered in quiz 1. Then you can have here the final answers. So the important thing in increasing difficulty is that answers must be provided after they worked on this activity so that they know if they understand the problem. So this is quiz 2. So let's say a student got this quiz correctly, then the learner will continue with quiz 3. So for quiz 3, actually, it includes the same, not the same, similar problem with quiz 2. But the difference is, as you can see here in problem number 1, we only have the table, but we don't have the tips on how to answer this. Okay? So the difference with quiz 2 and quiz 3 is that there are no longer instructions on how to do this. So they're going to try to replicate what they've done in quiz 2, and then they're going to do it in quiz 3. So that is for problem number 1. And in problem number 2, this one is a more difficult problem because a table is no longer given. So as you can see, increasing difficulty is first you have the basics for quiz 1. For quiz 2, you will be given a more difficult problem but with tips and with guidance. And then in quiz 3, you will answer the problem without any guidance by just trusting on what you've learned in quiz 2. And then next, we have quiz 4. So for quiz 4, it already includes all concepts discussed in this lesson playlist. So as you can see here, question 1 and question 2 includes simple interest with only one payment. But after that, items 3, 4, 5, and 6 includes problem that contains multiple payments for a simple interest. Okay, so going back to our playlist, this setup or this augmentation of lesson playlist is what we call increasing difficulty, because the quizzes becomes difficult. And also the difficult quizzes are not discussed in the video, so they need to figure out on how to answer the difficult questions by just referring to the tips or to the guidance given by the teacher. So that is for increasing difficulty. This time we're going to continue with adding integration. So we're already done with the simple interest, lesson playlist. This time we're going to continue with another playlist. This playlist is titled Central Angles and Intercepted Arcs. Okay, so as you can see in this playlist, it is somewhat kind of different with the normal setup, because, well, it is not divided into content and assessment. Instead, it is divided into 3 tasks. Task 1, Task 2, and Task 3. So, again, same with the normal setup, you will always start with an introduction. So, for the introduction, same concept, you will start with the objectives, but the instructions here will be, let's say, more complicated compared to the latter two. Okay? So, the instructions here, well, these are general instructions per task. So, task 1 will include videos and sheet work that will cover the basics of central angles and intercepted arc. Similar with increasing difficulty. In integration, in adding integration, you also need to start with the basics. Okay? And then after that, we have task 2, which is a Kahoot activity. So this is an additional activity or an additional assessment for the basics. And then for task 3 is, let's say, the main essence of adding integration. Okay? You need to add real-life applications for the last part of this augmentation of lesson playlist. So in that case, let's continue with the first task. Okay? So in task 1, actually in adding integration, task 1 is actually the same with the normal setup. We'll start with an introduction and then a content or contents, and then after that, a sheet work. So we are not going to look at the introduction and the video anymore, because those are just similar with the normal setup. So we're going to continue with the sheet work. Okay. So sheet work for task 1 will include activities that are, let's say, easy or basic in nature. Okay. So we will have here questions that will test basic competencies of the students. And these questions can be answered by just directly replicating what they watched in the content. Okay, going back to task 1. So again, task 1 is similar to normal setup. This is to develop basic skills that they will need or that they will apply in the application on task 3. So, okay, so that is task 1. And then next is task 2. Task 2 is just an additional activity for, the basic concepts. Okay, so this time, we're not just going to use a simple quiz. We're going to use Kahoots to make the quiz more interactive. So let's try 2 questions, and then we will continue with task 3. So we're going to use the name testing. Oh, it's already used. Then make it testing 2. Okay, so in task 1, you have a simple quiz. This time we have a quiz that is more interactive. Okay, okay. So as you can see on the activities or on the questions for task 2, those are basic questions that could be answered if you worked on your task 1. So let's go back to the lesson playlist. Okay, and then once a student already developed the basic competencies for central angle and intercepted arcs, then this is the time they're going to apply those basic knowledge to the application part. So in this application part, of course, we're going to start with instructions. Okay, so for instructions, look for a partner to accomplish this task. It can also be individual. Watch a specific scene in the movie The Martian. Then here's the link, and then answer the follow-up questions after watching the clip. So they're going to, in this activity, they're going to watch a clip in which they expect that they're going to use the concept of central angles and intercepted arc. So next is we're going to continue with the video clip. Okay. So remember the topic is about circles, and then observe the video. The video should apply the concept of central angle and intercepted arcs. So this is a clip from The Martian. So, okay. Anyway, yeah. This is a clip from The Martian where Matt Damon want to communicate to NASA, which is actually on Earth, and he is on Mars. Okay, so he needs to identify the correct alphabetical symbols or alphabetical system, so that he can decipher the different messages that his support team in NASA would want to give it. Okay, so that's the video. Okay, then after that, going back to, we're going to continue with the follow-up questions. So for the follow-up questions, there are 3 coding systems that he needs to decide, and then you need to ask your students some questions about the video. So in this case, we have alphabet, Morse code, and hexadecimal. So in the video, Matt Damon used hexadecimal. Okay? And then after that, you're going to have another question. This time, you need to make them explain how they can apply central angles and intercepted arc in the situation given earlier. So in this case, so why did he use that coding system? Well, he's referring to hexadecimal. In this activity, remember that the arcs is equal, or the degrees of the arcs is equal to the central angles. So if he used the alphabet system, in which it includes 26 letters, then the arc will be divided into 26 parts, making each arc very, let's say, very short. So if the arc is short, then the central angle or the movement of the camera will not be distinct with the other letters. Now, if he used the Morse code, which only includes 0 and 1, then it will be too long before they can communicate. So in that case, they're going to use a hexadecimal in which they will going to divide the circle into, let's say, smaller parts, but not as small as the alphabet. So in that case, it used there the concept of the central angle, or the degrees of the central angle is equal to the degrees of the degrees covered by the intercepted arc. So the larger the central angle, well, let's say the longer the intercepted arc. In that case, okay. So that is the example for adding integration. So we're not just ended with the central angle and intercepted arc. We connected it, or we transferred it to a real-life situation. Well, in this case, not that a real-life situation, but a practical situation in which we use the clip from the Martian. Okay. After adding integration, we're going to continue with partial discovery. So we're done with the central angle and intercepted arc. This time we're going to continue with another activity. So this time we're going to use the lesson playlist for break-even point. So as you can see here, this is what we call a partial discovery, because, well, the content are, well, not all content are directly given to the students. Okay, so however, this is still called partial because there is still a direct instruction part here. Okay, that is part 1. So it is partial because the whole lesson playlist is not only, or the lesson is not only discussed through discovery method. There is still some part of direct instruction in this augmentation of a lesson playlist. So we're going to start with instructions. So this time we have here, okay, this time we have here the objective. So the activity will lead to the formula of the break-even point. Well, I suggest you give an isolated, let's say, portion or separate portion for the objectives. And then we have here, okay, we have here a very comprehensive and long instructions. Okay, so in this partial discovery, you will have part 1. So part 1 is read the attached PDF to define the following terms. So since the terms will be defined directly through reading in a PDF file, then this is the direct instruction part of this lesson playlist. However, starting part 2 to part 3 until 4 and 5, then this parts 2 to 5 will include the discovery part of this lesson playlist. Okay, so let's continue now with part 1. So in part 1, well, it includes definitions, okay? Because, well, in this lesson, you cannot have a formula for break-even point without identifying the important terms or the variables that you will use, well, in break-even point. Now, these are just definitions and concepts for break-even point. However, it is not included in the direct instruction the part where the student should know how to solve problems for break-even points. Okay, so that is the discovery part of this lesson playlist. So next is part 2. Okay, in part 1, terms are already identified. In part 2, well, okay, so in this part, So we have here the given information, and then more or less what I want students to do here in this part is to identify what is fixed cost in numbers and what is variable cost. Because in part 1, it only includes the description, but it does not include an example on how to identify a fixed cost from a variable cost. So this time, they're going to identify the total fixed cost, they're going to identify the total variable cost, but the definitions are restated here. Okay? Now, if a student knew that he needs to add the ingredients, okay, he needs to add the ingredients, these ingredients, to get the total variable cost, and then he needs to add the other expenses for variable cost because he or she knows the definition of fixed cost and variable cost, then more or less we're done with part 2. Okay, in part 2, once they identified what is fixed cost for 1 day and what is variable cost for 1 unit, then actually that is the first part in solving break-even point problems. So we're going to continue with part 3. So in part 3, we have that we need to determine the equation that will represent total cost and total revenue. So in this case, since the task here is to relate total variable cost with total fixed cost, and total cost. Okay, so you need the students need to relate these variables. Okay, and then they can relate it by using an equation. So in an equation for the total cost, as you can see here, given the definition of a variable cost that it is based on the number of products produced, then a student can determine that to get the total variable cost, he needs to multiply the number of cheesecakes with the variable cost, and then he will get the total variable cost. Once he or she got the total variable cost, he or she should know that to get the total cost, he needs to add the total variable cost with the total fixed cost to get all the cost. Okay? So, if a student completed this table, he or she will recognize that to get the total cost, you need to multiply the variable cost with the total number of products produced and then add it to total fixed cost. Given that he will have or she will have a formula that is for 100x, which is the variable for number of products, for 100x plus 400x plus 1,300 will be equal to the total cost. So that will be the equation which will be used for the next part of this lesson playlist. For the total revenue, well, of course, in this case, they will determine how to get the total revenue, and hopefully they can determine it, or they can say that to get the total revenue, you need to multiply the number of cheesecakes with the selling price of selling price for one whole cheesecake. So that will be x times 600 is equal to y. So in this case, by just using a table, they can determine, or they can formulate an equation, okay, that will relate the variables needed for solving break-even point. So that is for part 3. Next is for part 4. So for part 4, this time, the student needs to really understand what is the meaning of break-even point. Well, break-even point is, a point that total revenue is equal to the total cost. So given that, they need to solve for the break-even point by using system of linear equations. So this is part 4, and then a student will use the formulas, the equations that they formulated for part 3. Okay, so in that case, you need to add it. So remember that the equation for total cost is the variable cost times the number of products produced plus the fixed cost, which will be equal to y. Okay, and then if you're going to add another one, the second equation is to get the total revenue, the selling price per cheesecake times the number of cheesecake will be equal to the total revenue, which is represented by y. Okay, so in this case, you can, well, in this case, you will have here a table, you will have here 2 lines. So given the 2 lines, how can a student determine the break-even point? So to determine it, remember that break-even point is when the total cost is equal to the total revenue, and that point is where the 2 lines intersect. So if we're going to get the point of intersection, then they can determine that they can reach break-even point by selling 6.5 cheesecakes per day, or in peso, 3,900 pesos is the break-even point. Okay, so once they realize that part, they're ready to answer the problem in part 5. So in part 5, they will answer now the question, what is the break-even point in units and what is the break-even point in pesos. Now, you can follow this up with the formula, or you can also make them derive their own formula for break-even point. Well, in this activity, in this example, we only included how to solve it using lines, and then we just had a discussion on deriving the formula for break-even point. Okay, that's it for lesson playlist for break-even point, which exemplifies a partial discovery method because, well, we still have part 1, which is a direct instruction. In full discovery method, there will be no direct instruction. All of the content will be discovered by the students by giving them activities. Okay, so we're done with partial discovery, and this time we're going to continue with full discovery. So here is an example for full discovery. Also, please take note that regardless of the augmentation of the lesson playlist, all of the lesson playlists will be given to the students without discussion from the teachers. So the teacher will just announce that they need to answer these activities, and then students will asynchronously work on these activities. So more or less, lesson playlists are activities that are asynchronous, and students will learn the content on their own. Okay? Regardless if you use discovery method or you just give them a direct instruction through video or through write-ups. So we're done with the break-even point. This time we're going to discuss full discovery, and then to exemplify that, we're going to use the lesson playlist for corollaries on inscribed angles. So again, regardless to the augmentation of the lesson playlist, we always start with an introduction, which includes the objectives and the instructions. But this time, this is a discovery method for 3 different lessons, and then once they discovered the content for the 3 lessons, well, each lesson will give them an answer to the essential question, what happened to the inscribed angles that intersect the same arc. So each lesson represents, here. Okay, each lesson represents one corollary for inscribed angles. Okay, so let's start first with the introduction. So for the introduction, you will start with the objectives, and then after the objectives, you will have here, well, the instructions. So for the instructions, these are general instructions for lessons 1, 2, and 3 because, well, the instructions will not be repeated for the 3 lessons. Okay, so for the instructions, they will open a GeoGebra activity that will lead them to the corollary on inscribed angles. And then they're going to respond to a discussion so that they knew that their observation is correct or not. And then they're going to check their observation by answering an online quiz, which will have an automatic checking mechanism so that they will realize if their observation is correct or not. And then after that, once all the lessons are done, they will answer a Kahoot activity, which will summarize all the corollaries that they discovered in this lesson playlist. So we have here the lesson playlist. Let's try 2 lessons. Let's start with lesson 1 and then lesson 3 and then let's try the Kahoot activity. Okay, for lesson 1, given the instructions, we're going to start with the GeoGebra activity. Okay, so more or less, this GeoGebra activity is the main essence of this lesson playlist, because this lesson playlist aims to make students realize or to formulate their own corollary given the activities here. Okay, so this time we're going to derive a conclusion on inscribed angles that intercept the same arc. Okay, so that will be our objective. So we should have a conclusion on this topic by just working on this activity. Okay, so in this case, for the instructions, they will be given points A, B, C, and D on circle O, considering that arc. Consider the arc AB. Okay, so we have here the arc AB, and then from angle ACB, where C is the vertex and segment AC and BC. So more or less, they're going to construct angle ACB and ADB. So first, put segments. Ayan. So we have ACB and ADB. Given angle ACB and ADB, they will measure the 2 angles and then they will answer the follow-up question. Okay, so they're going to measure this angle. So let's start first with ACB. So ACB has 46.19 degrees, and then ADB will have 46.19 degrees also. Okay, so given that, now they're going to do the following task. Okay, so observe angles ACB and ADB. So they will realize that these 2 inscribed angles intercept the same arc AB, and then they have the same measurements. Okay, and then they will ask, maybe it is only the same because well, the conditions are correct. So they will try to move the points and then see that they will realize that even they move the points, even they make the arc smaller or larger, the inscribed angles still have the same measurements. And given that, they will give an observation. Okay, and then after the observation, they're going to give a conclusion about inscribed angles and the arcs that they intersect. Okay, now after that, they're going to share their conclusion or observations in this discussion part. And then after the discussion part, they will check if their observation is correct by answering the quizzes. Okay, so by answering the quizzes, if they know that angles that intersect the same arc of BC, which is 92 degrees, then they will realize that angle BDC and BEC have the same measures. And then if they answered this activity and then they got the correct answer by using the conclusion they formulated in this part, then, well, that is what we call a discovery learning. We didn't give direct instruction, but they learned, they discovered they discover the corollary themselves. Okay, so that is for lesson 1. And then let's go back to the other one. Let's try lesson 3. Okay, for lesson 3, same concept. Kaya GeoGebra activity. Another tip for discovery method, make sure that you know the capacity of your students. So level the instructions, level the activity to their competencies, because sometimes discovery methods are, let's say, too difficult for students that they will be discouraged to work at it at all, especially if they don't get it. Okay, so in this case, the objective here is to discover the properties of cyclic quadrilaterals. Well, in this case, given points A, B, C, and then draw segments. Okay, they will draw segments A, B, B, C, C, D, and D, A. Okay, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, A, and then after that, okay, after that, find the measure of angles of each angle. Okay, in this case, I hope this is correct. Nope, it's not. We're going. Okay. Okay. So here are the angles. Now, given that angles, they will now answer the follow-up question. So identify the pairs of opposite angles. So opposite angles, let's say angle D and B, and then after that, add the measure. So if they add it, they will realize that it will be equal to 180. Okay, and then if they try to move, okay, if they try to move the points, they will see that if they again add the opposite angles, they will still realize that the sum will still be um, 180 degrees. Okay, so in that case, they will have a conclusion on opposite angles of a quadrilateral. They will determine that opposite angles. Okay. They will identify that opposite angles of a cyclic quadrilateral are or will be, if you add it will be 180 degrees. Okay, or we can call it that the opposite angles are supplementary. Okay, so that is for lesson 3, and then for that lesson 3, they will continue, they will share the observation in the discussion part, and then they will work on a quiz. Okay, and then after that, let's go back to the activity. Now, in a discovery method, I suggest you put an activity that will summarize all the conclusions that they derived. So in this case, by using a Kahoot activity. Okay, so we're not going to answer this Kahoot activity anymore. Okay, so this time we're going to end the examples for the lesson playlist. Okay, so those are all the lesson playlists. And in that case, since we're already done with all of the lesson playlists, then we're already done with all of the augmentations of the lesson playlist. Now, I'm not saying that these are the only augmentations of the lesson playlist, because again, your creativity is the only limit for the number of augmentations for the lesson playlist. Maybe you can discover more, or you can share more augmentations of lesson playlists other than these 4. Okay. Now, I would like to end my webinar with this phrase that I made myself. So a teacher's job in this time of pandemic is to bring hope to our students that they still have a future to look forward to. Okay, so more or less, we teachers give our students hope and sense of normalcy, given that many of them can no longer go to school physically. So we need teachers to be there, even though not physically, but through online activities, which is one of them is a well-developed lesson playlist. Okay, so everyone, thank you, and don't forget to like, react, comment, and share this video. Again, this is Jose Maria Calamlam. You can call me Sir Jomar, and that is my episode 4 PNU Talks.